everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today I am privileged to be joined by two special guests, Rabbi Avrohom Baruch Brafman and Rabbi Dov Keilson. Rabbi Brafman is the only son of Rabbi Aaron Brafman. Rabbi Keilson is a close talmid of Rabbi Brafman and the mashgiach of Mesifta Chaim Shloimeh. And I will say that the reason why I described you that you are a talmid is because you're still a talmid, even though Rabbi Brafman is not here. But you're very much living the ideals and trying to emulate the great menahel of Yeshiva of Far Rockaway and Rabbi Avrohom Baruch. This book, really, what Rabbi Finkelman did here, a yeoman's job of bringing your father's story to life, so that
100%.
All of us could continue to be inspired by him.
But speaking about the fact, you mentioned that he's still a talmid, so much so that it was really Rabbi Dov's inspiration and driving force behind the actual book. He was the one that brought up the topic by one of the ArtScroll gatherings a few years ago and said, we have to put out a book. My father was so special. My father is, we know that. And we all felt that. And all the talmidim felt that. And Rabbi Dov was the driving force that brought it to life.
Well,
and we're
Rabbi
forever
Dov,
grateful
thank
for
you.
him.
Thank you for doing that, because this is a book that I know, ArtScroll puts out a lot of books, and they are all exceptional in their own way. This book is uniquely warm, I would say. There was something about your father that was just so, they don't make people like that.
Yeah.
And so talk about, Rabbi Avrohom Baruch's talking about how you were the driving force. What entered your mind? What did you envision? What did you see?
That's a loaded question, but I think the most important nakuda that inspired me was that I felt compelled out of a sense of overwhelming hakaras hatov to my rebbi for everything that he did for me. As Chazal tell us, Rabbi mevir l'chayir elam haba, and even though it's impossible for a talmid to adequately express hakaras hatov, a token of hakaras hatov could be to be able to show the world a little glimpse of what we were zeicha to have in our midst.
Wow. Now, we spoke to Rabbi Finkelman, about writing a book about a menahel. You were zeicha to be a son.
Right.
And sometimes it's different. My father was zeicha to be a principal in the yeshiva I went to for many years. And I was also had that vantage point. I knew my father at home. I knew my father in yeshiva. Did you find that it was a different person? The Rabbi Aaron Brafman, menahel of Yeshiva of Far Rockaway, and the Rabbi Aaron Brafman, who's, I would mention, not only are you a son of Rabbi Aaron Brafman, you are the only son.
And also a talmid.
And a talmid.
So it happens to be interesting that you bring this. It was mentioned in the book. I think it's both in our introduction to the book, and it was mentioned numerous times, the fact that my father molded our family together with the yeshiva. There was no two things. We were part of the yeshiva upbringing, part of the yeshiva experience, Yom Tovim, Simchas Torah, Purim. It was all one big happy family, so to speak. And he made us want to be part of the yeshiva. He brought the simcha home. He brought the hashkafas of the yeshiva at home. I mean, there was always talmidim in the house constantly for Shabbos, for Tovim, for Sudas, especially after my sisters got older and the house was just me. Constantly, Bachram always over. Purim was always an exciting day in the house. Sukkot, we had a Sukkot B'Sheva, was the second night Yom Tov. The whole community came, but it was mainly for the Bachram. And we all, and I speak for my sisters as well, we all looked forward to it. And we went away always 1 week a year. We went on a yeshiva retreat, and he took us all along. It was something we looked forward to, and something that he blended. That there shouldn't be two things: the yeshiva and our house.
But did you ever feel, our father is so involved in the yeshiva, and the talmidim's lives and interests are so much part of him? Did you ever feel like, I just want my father to be my father?
So obviously he struck a very impressive balance, because I never had such feelings like he's too busy. And I think part of the reason why it was that way is because we didn't look at yeshiva as something else. We were all part of it. We felt that we were helping him. We were, aiding him and assisting him, whether he wasn't home much. But we always, once a day, we generally always had supper together throughout all the years I was growing up. He was always there, unless there was a simcha. But on more often than not, it was all one. And it wasn't like I had to feel like I was giving him away, so to speak.
Now, you from a Talmud's vantage point, Rabbi Brafman was so ibegegeben to the Talmidim, as the book describes. His devotion to every yachid was almost superhuman. How he was able to, when he was speaking to a Talmud, the only thing that existed in the world was that Talmud. And you saw that as a very close Talmud and someone who benefited from that love and that care. Talk about what it meant to you.
So coming into the yeshiva in 1989, I was a 10th grader. I was in ArtScroll for 9th grade. With my family made a sabbatical. And when I walked in, I was trying to find my way, and he right away took an interest. And the first thing that he did was, which is in retrospect an act of complete godless, was he took a 10th grader who was not really yet into learning, to say the least, and he set him up to learn with his only son, who was then in 2nd grade.
Oh, wow. So you're in 10th grade, you're in 2nd grade?
Yes, I believe it was
Shabbos
only
Shabbos
afternoon to learn what was the limud.
Mishnayos,
Shabbos, and then we went. Over the years, we've never really stopped learning, even though it's not daily or weekly.
Uh-huh.
But there was the pikchus in being able to raise up a talmid by giving him the trust that I want you to teach my own son.
Wow.
And
Did you you felt the pressure?
Pressure, no. I didn't feel pressure. I felt a pride that he really believed in me, to the extent that in the summer of the 10th grade, in that day camp that Rabbi Brafman had, Matov, he said to me, I want you to be the rebbi of my son's class, 2nd grade. I was coming out of 10th grade. At that point in my life, I had no inkling of even thinking of chinuch as something that would be my future. But he saw, like was mentioned in other venues, he saw things that we weren't able to see at the time. He saw the future, and he saw the potential in me to be a mashpia one day, and he just threw me into it, which was metamorphosis.
Did you push back at all on that, or did you just say,
No, I was stunned, and then I said, okay, I'll try. He said, don't worry, I'll help you out, it'll be good. I'll come in when you need me. And that was the first taste, which...
Yeah, we didn't give him an easy time.
Yeah, that's also true. It was a moment of transformation for me in my head of what I want to do in the future.
It's inspiring to all of us to hear, because it shows what the belief of a mechanech could do to a teenager.
Yeah.
Imbue in them a belief that of kaiches they didn't even know they had, and really transform their lives. It's not an exaggeration to say.
It's not even slight exaggeration.
And to think that how many years later we're sitting here today, that you were the driving force behind the book written about him. That to think about how it came full circle. Yeah. That 10th grader who maybe didn't know where his life was headed.
Well, what's most amazing, if I could interject, is that throughout the writing of the book and the interviews and the discussions with Rabbi Shimon Finkelman, Zolgozunstein, who was really incredible, and we're so happy that we chose him. He did a remarkable job. I learned in the process of the writing so many more things about my relationship with Rabbi Brafman that I didn't even realize before. Wow. And one of those things were in conversations with Rabbi Finkelman in the morning, when I would see him in Darchei Torah, I would go up to my office and I would see a 10th grader walking down the hallway, and I would think to myself, that was me. And I'd say to him, come to my office, let's learn together. It's really, bringing, like you said, full circle, but bringing to reality everything that I received, and now Be'ezus Hashem, trying to give it over weiter to the next door.
So you think about Rabbi Brafman quite often, I imagine, your position as a mashgiach.
So I happen to have a picture of him right next to my seat, a picture of him at my chasana, being Eid Kedushin, and I believe I could honestly say a day does not go by that I don't think about him.
Wow. Now back on the home front.
Yeah.
What was your impression growing up of your father? Of course, as you described, the yeshiva and the family were one, but now that you hear so many testimonies of talmidim who were transformed by this legendary menahel, but to you he was a father, right? He was your father. Did you see that at home? Did you know?
We definitely saw. He was always learning. One of the things it's actually mentioned in the book that one of the Kabbalahs he made when he first started out, said his children should only see him learning, never wasting his time. He never was home doing nothing. He's either sitting at the table learning, sitting on the couch with a sefer. He's never looking at a newspaper or doing anything else unless it was in the bed, unless he was, But otherwise, it was all we wanted. The children should always see him learning, and he had tzedarim and many different things. He was constantly making siyumim, every yard site of his parents. Eventually his parents, first his grandfather, and then his parents. Then when my other grandparents, my mother's parents, went after he made the same every yard site for them as well. Constantly finishing bits mesechtas. He always was on top of what the yeshiva was learning, because whenever Rebbe wasn't there, he'd just fill in, whether it was 9th grade, 12th grade, it didn't make a difference. And Bachrim used to come over and ask him questions throughout the entire mesechta. At night, it was very common. You just walk over to my father and say, "What's pshat in this Gemara?" 9th grade, I want to know Pasha pshat, and he was always answering on the spot.
Wow.
But so we were always aware of my father's greatness. But what I wasn't maybe so aware of until we sat shiva, close to 6 years ago, and then seeing the book and all the interviews and the phenomenal job Rabbi Finkelman did, but the roshim and the life-changing impact that he had, it was unbelievable. It was like impressed, like we were like, not surprised, but like we didn't realize how far-reaching his effect had. And it's happening daily. People are bump into me wherever I go. If I ask my name Brafman, they say, "Oh, you related to Rabbi Brafman?" "Oh, he did this, he did that." People are not in yeshiva. There's people in the community, or they even remember him from Camp Aguda, who was a head learning Rebbe there, close to 40 years ago. And his warmth and his realness, really.
I think
his
that's
sincerity.
very interesting. It's very interesting what you're saying, because sometimes you have people who are involved in askanos and they're helping out a lot of people, and it's written all over them. You see it. They're harried. They're overwhelmed. They have lists. They're pulling it out. They're making phone calls. So someone like your father, who really was carrying so much, I would almost think that it would manifest itself on the home front, but it doesn't sound like it.
No, it was pretty amazing.
That's very interesting.
So there's one word that I thought would come out already in the interview, but Ben Finkelman touched on many nakudas, and it was unbelievable. But if you have to, and one of my brothers and I think said this in the book, but I think if you'd have to define my father in a certain sense in one word, it was achrayas. He was a bal achrayas for himself, for his mishpacha, for the yeshiva, for the community, and he felt an achrayas for Klal Yisrael. He would constantly call up, I know numerous times as well, Rabbi Shmuel Bloom, when he was still involved in Aguda, to share his opinion about what they should do or not do. He would call the yeshivas and different yeshivas if he felt they could do something to wake up Klal Yisrael if certain things were going on, if there was a maasim in ArtScroll, whatever the need was. He felt, as Rabbi Sherman mentioned in his forward, it was so classic. He was once talking to Rabbi Sherman about the fact how some schools wanted to go on an end-of-year trip, and there'd just been a terrorist attack or something, and they came to ask Rav Shach if they should maybe tone down the trip. And Rav Shach said, yeah, they should tone it down. And my father then said to Rabbi Sherman, but it's so bothersome. Why do they need to ask? Shouldn't they have their own das? And this was so, and I remember as I was getting older, and I started appreciating his achrayas and his regesh more. And I used to tell him things that, what I saw from my perspective here now living in Lakewood, different people either doing things or not doing things. I used to, they didn't say Tillim after davening? Like, when you need someone to tell you to go say Tillim, this Klal Yisrael's in a sorry, you have to daven. Like this was, that's how we walked around, was achrayas and to be marmak kvei shamayim wherever he was.
I know, without a question, this is something that the talmidim saw, right? This is something he spoke about, achrayas.
Every single shmuz. Not a shmuz went by without mentioning Klal Yisrael, those words, repeatedly throughout.
What did
quotable quote in Yeshiva, the Bachman used to make fun of, but it was always the maasim in the Welt. That was his quotable quote. That was his go-to. Every topic was always something, the maasim in the Welt. What's going on in the world. And what's our job?
We're not living for ourselves.
Correct.
We're living as part of something bigger than ourselves. But on a tangible level, as a mechanic yourself now, What do you think he really wanted from 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders, Beis Medrash Bachrim? You know, most boys are focused, hopefully, on their own personal aliyah, which is what they should be focused on. What did he really want from teenagers?
Just before Dave answers, I just want to interject, because numerous times in the shmuzim he would say, I know you're too young, but I have to say it anyway.
He was planting seeds.
Planting seeds.
That's the answer.
But Dave maybe has a different take.
That's definitely one part of the answer, giving us hasagas of what we should yearn to feel, even if we're not feeling it yet. But I think, like Rabbi Finkel mentioned so beautifully, you're not created for yourself. If we saw with our own eyes the manifestation of that Mishnah,
Rabbi Finkelman also mentioned that he had foresight. He saw years ahead of his time different various things, and I'm sure on a chinuch level that was true also. That maybe the 10th, 11th, 12th grader doesn't understand fully what I'm saying now about achrayas, about the Welt, about thinking outside of your Da'at Amas. But one day, their menahel's words will seep in. I'm sure that was part of his approach, because you 100%. See his talmidim have gone on to become marbitzei Torah, Baal Batim would take achrayas. No matter what they're doing in their life, they remember Rabbi Brafman and his ashpah.
Could I add one nakuda, because Rabbi Avrohom Baruch is mentioning the way the family sort of uptights the tata by speaking to a lot of talmidim. That's definitely an uptight that's MS, but my uptight, if I'm allowed to uptight as a mensch, but just at least one cook on him, which I know resonated a lot with a lot of talmidim, was the sense of unbelievable humility and the she'ifa to always be growing, to the point that he would express that constantly to us. Besides telling us that you're young, you don't understand what I'm saying, he would tell us repeatedly every single shmuz and in personal conversations, you're so lucky, you're young, you have so much that you could still do. Mm-hmm. And we saw that she'ifa, every siyum that any bachar, any talmid would make. First of all, I still don't know where the minhag came from, but he would say along the hadron. Everyone remembers that.
Oh, really?
He would say along the hadron with us.
With all the bachar?
No,
whenever
anybody made a siyum, he would say the hadron with us. Whatever the minhag, the reason,
I think does it too.
The Yeshiva does it too. Whatever the minhag is, the reason for that minhag is, the mitzias was he was living the siyum with us. I want to finish also, just like you're finishing. And the pashtus that he would run the yeshiva, putting up the signs on the door of what time the zmanim are going to be, cleaning up the tables, to the point where a rebbi told me after he was nifter, he said to me, what I saw in Rabbi Brafman was an eved neman to Hashem and to the klal. Without any fanfare. He was cleaning up the tables, setting up the place for Shabbos. He was there early for Shacharis, early for Shabbos. The point is that lemachzik tivusa lenafshe. You would tell him that we're having an interview about a book that's written about you. He wouldn't know what we're talking about. Lemachzik tivusa lenafshe.
Right.
Askan?
100%.
His humility was
off the charts. Off the charts.
And that's one of the things that endeared him to people in general, but to the talmidim.
Yeah.
When their menahel is so self-effacing and so not about himself. You're talking about cleaning up. There was no ego. There was no ego. You read this book and you see in story after story, it was never, ever, I don't think ever about himself. Ever. It was never, ever about himself. So when you have a machanach who's being machanach not ever about himself or his ego, is it a wonder that he was able to touch people
and that everyone should say about him?
Way?
Right. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, please go on.
Everyone should say about him the same words. He was so special and he loved me so much. Like Rabbi Finkelman said, but I'm telling you as a talmid that this is what we say to each other.
I could tell you just also, again, we're speaking over here very personal as a son, as a talmid, and we spoke to Rabbi Finkelman as the writer and as someone who knew Rabbi Brafman, but I could tell you from going around now telling people, I'm excited to tell people, there's a book coming out about Rabbi Aaron Brafman. Everyone has the same reaction. It's like, wow. And they just smile. They hear your father's name, and it's a smile. That's everyone's reaction. Is Rabbi Brafman was one of those people. When you heard his name, when you met him, when you saw him, it made you just feel better as a person. I'm sure you hear that.
As once the cover was ready and I started, showing it to people, the excitement was just like palpable. It was especially the close talmidim, but even that, I sent it out around to people just to get them excited.
Right.
Because it's been a long time in the making, and we're finally, Baruch Hashem, about to be released.
I would be remiss. I want to mention this now so I don't forget. But the book describes how ibegegeben he was to other people, and I'm sure, and you could talk about this as a son, I'm sure the hero behind that was your mother.
100%.
Because your father was able to, he devoted his life to the yeshiva, he devoted his life to talmidim, he devoted his life to Klal Yisrael, but he's only able to do that if someone on the home front is carrying the load.
And I can't, almost every simcha, Baruch Hashem, we have 7 sisters, a lot of simchas, and at Yom Achron, every simcha one of his main points, he used to always say, my mother was the only child who grew up in San Francisco, and he looked at the room and he used to just thank the Rebbe and start crying. That was a constant, and it didn't happen more than once. It wasn't just like, okay, once and he cries, and every single simcha, nachamu, with the same emotion. And definitely, my mother that takes a tremendous amount of credit. She deserves a tremendous amount of credit. B'lei and hara, she should have richas yom v'shanim. And the book should serve as some type of nechama, some type of,
What was the lesson that she said, if I can interrupt, after the Shiva? She said I was married to him for
50-something years.
And I didn't realize
who he was?
To the extent of who he was. That was the lesson that she said. The extent. No, wasn't that the lesson?
There were stories coming. We mamash had no. I'm saying a lot of them are in the book, but I'm sure there are many that are not.
You say Megala Tefach, Mechased, V'chaim. There was some kind of dynamic
things
there
where he somehow had his pulse on the community, and in terms of just some things that he was involved in without people realizing, giving people money when he knew that they were going through a difficult time. No one knew how he knew about. They weren't associated with yeshiva. I remember them telling us they weren't parents. They didn't daven in yeshiva, and he somehow heard that the person lost his job. He called him up. He said, "For the next 3 months, your rent's on me." And no one knew how he knew. No one even, but he had this sense, like I said, he had a sense of achrayus. He just felt, and when there was nothing, it was mentioned somewhat before, there was nothing that was beneath him to do, and he didn't feel that if there's something to be done, that someone else should do it, he's going to pick up the phone and take care of it. And I was like, some of the articles, I think we did a phenomenal job in chapter 12, which is focused on the Jewish Observer articles, which was a very hard chapter to write, because it really, he worked through the articles and picked out certain nekudas which were main, and he made a purish basically on them. And I don't know if it says in the book exactly which year all of them were written, but I think it does. But I remember one of the talmidim said, he was this is going back in the mid-70s, and he wrote an article about chinuch, about mesifta chinuch, and he was a young mechanech, and it was a very solid piece, hashkafically, from a chinuch standpoint, and he was relatively young in his career.
Years, right.
And to take on and to put his name out there with such a stance, it was like unbelievable. But he was such an honor. But he saw a need, he saw a void, and he felt that if no one else can do it, he's gonna do it.
Yeah, like Rabbi Finkelman mentioned, he felt that achrayus for Klal Yisrael to put messages out there,
right,
as opposed to just being consumed with his own busy yeshiva and his own busy schedule. He had a lot on his plate. But whether it was by an Aguda convention or through articles in the Jewish Observer, whatever medium was available to get a message out there, you felt that.
And I know after the Jewish Observer stopped, he felt like there was no place that he felt comfortable to be able to convey his ideas and his ideals. There's many beautiful magazines, but he'd felt for his audience, so to speak, that he wanted to address, that he needed. He was very.
He did very much become synonymous with that.
Right.
a pure, untainted hashkafa, and he was part of what made the Jewish observers so unique.
Right.
But as much as that's true that he lost that platform, one of the things you see is that your father was able to adapt with the times.
Absolutely.
Throughout his years, he started off being mechanech in the 1970s. He finished in the teens, in the 2000s, and yet he was as effective at the end as he was at the beginning because he was constantly evolving mechanech. You saw that, right?
1,000%. When I got the Steller in Darchi Torah, so one of the most exciting parts about moving back was that as Hashem, we would be able to, I'd be able to see him more, and every summer we would learn together once again, just like the days of the talmid. As a talmid, we learned for 5 years straight.
You learned with Rabbi Brafman?
Every single day.
The chavrusa.
Lunch in his office from 11th grade through 3rd year Beis Medrash.
And what did you learn with him?
We went through the whole Pirkei Avos Be'iyun. We learned some Tanya. We learned Rus. We learned a whole array of different things. And then when I got the Steller, so in the summers, he would come over to me. As soon as I would finish yeshiva and say, "You're home for the summer, let's learn together, let's learn Navi together, slowly."
Wow.
And we learned together, in the Chazanish Emunah B'tachim, we learned Navi together. And so the connection and seeing also his continuous hashpah.
I'm more amazed than anything else that he had a lunch to catch his breath, but rather than catch his breath, he was learning with a talmid. That alone is...
Either breakfast or lunch, one of the
breakfast
two.
or lunch.
Yeah.
Did he ever take a break during the day? I'm just, his schedule from the morning when he came for he davened in yeshiva.
In yeshiva, he came home usually, once English got underway, like 3:30, he used to come home for to certain tkufas. But you should, take a little break in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, the early afternoon. But 6:30, 7 o'clock, he was back in yeshiva because in his night seder
program. And he had a night seder program for Baal Batim that he started years and years ago, learning with Dr. Joel Baum for
whole night
25 years.
For Baal Batim, 12 or 27 years.
Really?
Yeah.
And that was in yeshiva?
Yeshiva also.
He would give chaburas.
Wow.
And Shabbos afternoon, he would give a shir to Baal Batim also.
And that was the unique thing about Yeshiva of Far Rockaway, was besides Yeshiva, it was also a community minyan.
Right.
So there was always other people.
I remember, right.
Especially in the early days, there were very few minyanim. And anyone who wanted yeshiva should daven, and that was where they went. And any new face, he'd walk over and introduce himself and say, "Do you need a chavrusa?" And he,
Now, I asked this to Rabbi Finkelman, I'm curious, from your standpoint as a son, were there people who your father quoted as his, his rabbi and people he emulated, who you found shaped his worldview?
So I'm going to sound like a copying Rabbi Finkelman, but it really was the emes. Saying my great-grandfather definitely, who I'm named after, definitely was his earliest hashpah. He put out a sefer. He put out his ksavim, Imre Baruch, it's not out of print, but he put out his ksavim on Torah, on Chumash. And then Rav Shur, Rabbi Yaakov Rapam were constantly on his lips. His Argadalyo is went through and through. He's constantly quoting him through, in the early years for sure. Recently there's a lot more svarim out, and there was a lot more things to look at. But his Rabbeim and his early shmuzim always, Rav Shur, Rabbi Yaakov Rapam, and he was very. Rapam came to all our simchas till he was nifter. He kept up that. He came to my bris.
And as a talmid, you heard this as well, right? This was
constant. He asked me to pick up Rav Pam to bring him to one of the chasanas. And the way Rav Pam greeted Rabbi Brafman at the simcha, I see it mamash today.
It's 6 years since his ptira.
Almost 6 years.
Almost 6 years, right? And there was a feeling among those close to him, like yourselves and other talmidim, that there's a tremendous void. There's a tremendous void. The hope is that this book, not that we could ever fill the void, but the book could serve as to perpetuate everything he personified, and everything that we're missing in Rabbi Brafman today. We could all really carry on that legacy in some way, shape, or form. I don't think any one of us is capable of doing everything he did, because it was kind of superhuman how he balanced so much. Sayin is learning in the chinuch and the askanus of being Isaac in so many different things. in his Nesias oil, which was just beyond anyone's imagination. His humility, which alone was mind-boggling.
Can I add one thing that wasn't mentioned, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course.
Unless my time is up.
No, please.
The Yiras Shamayim, something that was not mentioned in the book. Rav Chaim Brim. No, I'm sorry. This point I'm going to mention now was not mentioned in the book. Rav Chaim Brim, that's how I remember he once came to speak in Yeshiva of Far Rockaway. It was
really? Rav Chaim Brim spoke in Far Rockaway?
He used to come to down Yom Naraim in Square Town. Square.
Oh, right.
When
That I know.
Bachman went to ArtScroll, they got close to him. When the Yeshiva of Far Rockaway Bachman went to learn in the mirror at one point. They
go to Rav Chaim Brim's house?
Yeah. And they
have a vad from Rav Chaim Brim.
Uh-huh.
So one time when he came, so Rabbi Brafman, I remember like yesterday, he drove out to Monsey to Square to pick him up. And for months after, the talmidim said Rav Chaim Brim could not stop talking about Rabbi Aaron Brafman and the Yiras Shamayim on his face. Wow. These are the words he said. And the emes is that as talmidim, we walk into the yeshiva now, it's beautiful. The binyan is beautiful, the Torah is beautiful, inside, outside is beautiful. The Maisa is tutvei. Anybody that walks into yeshiva, you cannot not hurt when you see his empty seat. And by his seat, there's a plaque that typifies, it didn't make it to the book, but it typifies the tefillah of Rabbi Aaron Brafman. Rabbi Brafman was known for his koyach tefillah. I remember sitting in Beis Medrash for a Seder. There were times he would come in and he'd go to his stender, take the red Tehillim, and pace back and forth. I don't know if he did it in your time anymore. In my time, it was Keseder. He left it in the Beis Medrash, and when he would come in, say Tehillim, and then he'd go back out. And everyone remembers the davening, the Mem Kaimcha, the certain points of Hallelujah. There's no one that davened in the yeshiva, or that was a talmid of the yeshiva that doesn't remember his bracha before Tekiyah Shofar. That this went into your kishkis, the Yiras Shamayim that was dripping from that bracha. Wow. And these things are eternal influences. Did I say okay?
Beautiful.
Any final thoughts on people are viewing this, people are going to go out and get the book. And Rabbi Finkelman said so beautifully that a biography, to really appreciate, you have to read it more than once. It's a sefer. Not because it's heavy, but because to internalize it, it's more than just leisure reading. And happens to be this book reads, it's so beautiful, it reads so geschmack. It's a very enjoyable read.
100%.
I say this about all of Rabbi Finkelman's books.
I remember when he sent us the manuscript, we couldn't put it down. Not just because it was our fault, it read so easily, and it was just
very easy
one thing
read.
after the other.
And the stories are...
But something that Rabbi Finkelman didn't mention, which I think is so important for people to realize, that he was a regular person.
Thank you. I was about to say
and
that.
Like we read biographies of Gedolim, sometimes we feel it's beyond our reach. Okay, it's a nice story, wow. But he really was a normal person.
Regular person.
And he just did. He did. He never stopped doing. There's so many things in the book that any person could really emulate and do.
Yeah, shukayach to both of you, Rabbi Avrohom Baruch, Rabbi Dovi, thank you for coming out to reminisce about your father. Chaval al da'avdin, but v'loy mishtachchen. We lost a gem when your father was nifter, when your rebbi was nifter. But he hasn't been forgotten. And this book will ensure that not only won't he be forgotten, but thousands and thousands of people who never knew Rabbi Aaron Brafman will be able to be inspired on some level by his life, by his ideals, by everything he stood for. And Amir Hashem, the book should serve as an aliyas neshama for him. And for all, he should continue to be a Melech Yosha for you, for your mother, for the whole mishpacha, for the talmidim, for the yeshiva, for all those who were so touched by him. So thank you again for being here.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For everything.
Thank you.